everybody. Thank you for coming into my panel. We'll be talking about a book series I've been working on called Waking of the Gods. Uh, I have, for NaNoWriMo, started book 3, so I've just been plugging away at that and been pushing the books, starting with book 1, chapter by chapter, over in my Patreon. Uh, so yeah, I'm here to talk a little bit about the world, the characters, and all of the fun things that I've been doing lately. So Waking of the Gods is I would call low fantasy, so it takes place on Earth, but it's mildly altered. Uh, Things like vampires and mages and gods and stuff live on Earth. And they are kind of in the shadows. Most people don't know about them. It depends on people's level of belief in things, and it goes kind of cyclical. So when the gods are awake, uh, there is usually direct evidence that they are awake and around and doing things. And when they're not, the belief in them and all of the other mythical things tends to fade as people see less of them. So yeah, it's like the basis of the world. And Waking of the Gods, pretty much kind of says the gods will be waking back up during this series. So we'll go from no one knows that they exist to there's things going on. The first book follows a character named Daith, and he is pretty much the innocent character. He's the driving plot point throughout that you're as you follow him. He doesn't really know what's going on. No one really knows what's going on in the first book. It's uh, a lot of you know fate and whatnot. Of people know something bad is about to happen, and they know that the main character has a lot to do with keeping it from getting out of hand, but they don't know what that is. So it's a lot of the first book is following through and kind of solving that mystery. The second book follows his best friend, Danny, and he is a life mage, and so Danny has the ability to control and alter living things, and all of the wonderful things that go right and wrong with that. Uh, and where Daith is this very kind of, I call him my Jesus character. He is, he's a very straight line character and is always out to do the good for whoever needs it, whether he agrees with them or not. Where Danny is uh, this kid who kind of grew up doing whatever he wanted and being able to alter things, and doesn't he doesn't fit very well in society, but also doesn't care because he's not afraid of anything, because he doesn't really have a lot of reason to be. He's got a good amount of hubris, and so the second book does a lot of following him through his growth, and his growth is a lot more of the social stuff. So like in book 1, it's a lot about accepting people and helping people out, kind of no matter the cost. Where Danny's book is a lot about personal growth. He deals with characters who either just don't give a shit about him and trying to get their acceptance, and to other characters that kind of rely on him, and he's there to protect. Uh, some of the things that I really enjoy in what I've been writing is, when I first started the series, because I took a long break in between book 1 and book 2, but in book 1, it was, like it was about inclusivity and stuff, but uh, I started it like 15 years ago, and the level of inclusivity was things like, hey, I have gay friends now, and as I've hung out in the world and interacted with a lot more people, and added, it's like I now, it's like I now work with several trans people. I work in the LGBT community, and I work in the kink world, and it's like deal with poly people and mono people and all the and ace people. And these are things that when I started writing, I didn't even know existed. So like I'm really loving that rolling into book two, I have those to draw on. So where my inclusivity early on was, hey, there's people from all over the world and that take place in this. Now the inclusivity has, like, there are characters who are ace. There's a trans character. There are gay characters. And I deal with some things. I've got a scene that I really like that I did in the second book, where the main character kind of accidentally outs a trans person, not knowing anything about it. And when I wrote that scene, I wrote it as a cis male, and then I took it and I sent it off to a bunch of my trans friends, and it was like, hey, how well did I handle this? And for the most part, they were like, you did a good job, but here's some language you should change, and here's some ways that like I feel would be more natural reaction. So I was able to not just claim I knew how people thought, and get other people's input. And so I find that in a lot of my writing, I like to do those little bits of research. Sometimes I just, it's like I'm working on my current book, and I had I wanted a character to just be identified by a scent. And so, I went and I looked up different perfumes from different regions at different times. And then I was like, oh, and so like I picked out these things, and I put them in the book expecting that no one will ever know or care. But it's my little bit where I'm just like, ha, I know where that's from. And maybe someone who's reading it is like, ha, I know where that's from. So I like a lot of little things like that. Now that I've talked for a few minutes, does anyone have any base questions for me?
We haven't seen anything come through Discord yet.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, the things that I write, I write for me. I've got stories in my head that I want to get out, and and I am going the self-publishing route. I'm releasing through Patreon until the first book is released, and then I will have that game. Not game. I'll have that book printed, and I will go into distribution that way. But I have a number of friends who are authors and try to write in stuff that is kind of outside the comfort zone of the bigger publishers. And like I hear a lot of their complaints about how their editors want to edit out a lot of stuff because they think it will scare off their audience and whatnot. And quite frankly, I don't care. Like I would rather release to a smaller audience who's going to get something out of the things I write and feel represented by the things I write, then I care about, selling to as wide an audience as possible. Because, I'm also a believer that if a book is good and people enjoy reading it, they'll find their audience. So, yeah, that's kind of where I've been aiming with like why I haven't gone in search of any kind of publishers. I may end up, as I talk with people a little bit more, end up going with a smaller publisher who will allow, me to keep all of the things that I want to keep, and then just take care of editing the stuff that needs to be edited. That said, I'm a firm believer in editors make a good writer. So like I tend to I lean heavily on my editors to guide me in my not necessarily in where I'm going with the story, but with my with my just grammar and stuff. So yeah, to quote my 11th grade English teacher, well, I think you should maybe join drama because you're not really what I would call an English student. Um, Well, I'll be dedicating my first book to her. So yeah, I enjoy wordplay. I enjoy creative writing. Um, I was talking with a friend the other day who was swearing at some of my word choice because I like to make up words. Um, and I had just stated that I had used the word diplomized in my book as a way to basically say uh, I didn't threaten them. Uh, and and he was swearing at me about that. To which I responded, uh, I paint images in the blood of linguistics. So that's kind of how I like to write. I like to write within ways that paint vivid images, and sometimes grammar be damned. So and word choice. So yeah, I mean that's a little bit of me and how I write. Um, so with oh,
Where do you get your inspiration from for your writing?
A lot of my writing that so I write first person, and so a lot of my inspiration is building out a character. Like I actually interview most of my characters before I start writing from their perspective, and so like I get a lot of my inspiration by just kind of letting them run and do things, and really it's the taking joy in the fact that oftentimes they don't do what I want them to do. So like I will have a scene. Actually, I had a scene in mid book two where I was introducing a poly relationship, and I really thought it would be a fairly quick introduction. Like I have this asexual character who's dating the main character of that book, and she's just like, hey, maybe you should open this up so you can, have sex. And I thought he would be like, woo, and it turns out he really wasn't. And what I thought would be a 3 to 5 page scene ended up being taking like over 20 pages to get where we wanted to go, but in a way that was natural for the characters, and that they that didn't feel forced. So like a lot of my inspiration comes out of uh, trying to introduce things that I have experienced in my life or would like to experience in a fake world, um, and following where they go naturally, and then with on a much broader version, the inspiration for this series actually just came out of just my love of kind of dark fantasy, and started with vampire characters, and a character who wasn't, and kind of grew. But then as I've taken in different fantasy worlds and whatnot, it's kind of guided like the direction of where I do and don't want to go. Like building out my pantheon has been an interesting run, because as I as I was going, and as I'm very big on rules, so if I set a rule, I try not to break said rule. I find that that's lazy writing, and so like as I'm setting out the rules for the gods, I'm making them more concrete, and as I'm saying with the vampires and whatnot, like they start with pretty broad rules, and as I hone them in, I have to always stick with that.
We have a question from Lord Touch Me. What's an example of a rule that you have?
An example of a rule is so a real simple one is I have a few for the vampires. It's like obviously they can't deal with sun, but I've also got the rule that like when the sun is up, it doesn't, like they can't see the sun, hopefully, or they're not alive. But when the sun comes up, they go catatonic, and so like there is no, you know oh, that vampire is so powerful that they were able to wake up and defend themselves in the middle of the day, even in their dark room. Like I'm like, no, like they have to take the extra precautions to make sure that that never happens. So that is one of like the rules that I set, and it's like I've also set that like my mage characters, they each have a couple of abilities, And I have no problem with them figuring out how to use those abilities in different ways, but I'm not okay with them being like, "Hey, look, I just produced a new ability because that helps me in this situation." And again, I feel like that's lazy writing. If I can't solve the puzzle with the pieces that I have, um, then I need to look at it from a different direction and maybe bring outside help for the character, but not just have them be able to suddenly do something new because uh, I've just there's far too much media that I take in where like you've got this character and then they're in a bind and then suddenly they have a new ability and that's always just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So, I guess more on that too is like I've got like the gods seem like right now I'm still honing them in, and so they got really broad abilities. Their abilities are much more concept, but one of the things that I've set in is uh, that gods can shift up what their abilities are. They've only got so much capacity to do things, but they can kind of forget skills and gain new skills. But this takes a long period of basically hibernation, and so like that's one of those things. Like I have one that's in hibernation that I really want to use what they do, and they're not going to be around for a while, and so like I have to accept that they they may come along too late. They may come along just in time. uh, they will not be useless, but they will but when they do come around, uh, they will have to figure out how to implement their abilities along the current timeline. So yeah, there's that. Uh, but yeah, does anyone else have any other questions, or would people be interested in hearing a clip from the first book? I've actually just a couple of months ago started. I've hired one of my audio engineer friends to be doing my audiobooks, and because I don't like reading aloud, it's not something I've ever enjoyed, so I decided to have someone else do it. And so we actually have an audio clip out of the first book. It's out of chapter 7. It's actually when the main character of the first book and the second book are first introduced, and a little bit to lead up to this. In the first book is called Visions. The main character, he has these visions. Effectively, they are daydreams, nightmares, however you want to put them, but they at this point in the story, they don't know what they mean. They just have them, but they seem to be triggered by certain people that are entering their lives. And when I write first person past tense. But during the visions, they shift to present tense. So you'll hear a little bit of past tense in the beginning, and it'll shift to present tense, and then it'll shift back to past tense. And that is the shift into and back out of a vision. So could we get that clip played?
Like most other days, I climbed up to my perch in the oak to observe people as they went about their business. As I watched, one kid in particular caught my attention.
Let's see.
He appeared to be about my age. He wore comfortable looking black clothes, had black spiked hair with royal purple tips, and his eyes had golden brown around the
I
pupil
don't
that
hear
fanned out
anything
into
yet.
vibrant green, just like mine. He looked around curiously as he walked through the park, heading toward the fountain. He looked interesting, so I swung down to introduce myself. He turned to look towards me as I landed, a genuinely happy smile on his face. I must have misjudged the time. The sun is setting fast and night seems to roll in over a matter of seconds like an angry storm. The crowd of people subconsciously disperse, and in their wake I see a woman walking up behind the kid, clad in a modest, old-fashioned velvet gown. She towers over him by at least 2 feet. Her hair dances like shadows against her ash-white skin. Her predatory blue eyes are trained on the back of his neck. He remains totally unaware of her presence. I try to warn him, but I can't move. She continues gliding toward him. Her movements are unnerving, slow, and calculated. She kneels down behind him, leaning towards the spot her eyes have been fixated on since her arrival. I still can't move. I watch in horror as mandible like fangs slowly fold out of her now open mouth, flexing in and out like tiny mechanical arms. Her eyes slide over to me, locking with mine. They seem even colder than the other blue eyed giants who have paralyzed me before. She smiles evilly, letting me know she is aware there is nothing I can do to save him. She never takes her gaze off of me as both venomous fangs and mandibles sink deep into his flesh. The sun hung high in the sky once again. The woman was nowhere to be found. The surrounding people were back, continuing with their lives as if nothing had happened. The kid stood, looking back at me with one eyebrow raised, as if put off by something I had said or done. Suddenly his face contorted as pure agony writhed across his face, fear welling up in his eyes. His arms twisted inward across his chest as he started to shake violently. The shaking increased until it became soul-rending convulsions. His legs gave way to spasms, dropping him gracelessly to the ground. I grabbed him and pulled him close, trying to help snap him out of it. Tears streamed down his face as the shuddering slowly subsided. He remained still for a few moments, his eyes glazed over. A crowd gathered around us while I sat.
So that right there is what I call my first favorite scene that I wrote. Not most favorite, but one of the first scenes that I really fell in love with, and it's because of the way the scene actually came about. At that time I was working in a hardware store in the return center, and I was just sitting there writing because the hours that I worked, there was a lot of downtime. And, as I was writing, I was like, I was literally at the point where, where Dave swings down to introduce himself. And then I heard a commotion and I looked over, and there was a guy going into a grand mal seizure, and I just watched it happen. And people were like, "Why didn't you get involved?" It's like, because there was people all around. There was already people on their phones. There was people trying to help. I just didn't need to be in the way. So what I did was I wrote exactly what I saw, and so I get this introduction, and it's just this thing that is channeling real life, and it just like the point in when it happened to me was just it was just very fortuitous, and so that is an example of where I use real life in my books. um, so yeah, that was kind of why I was in love with that scene. It's one of the reasons that I chose it as the audio clip that I would play, because you get your visions, but then I also it's like it came about in a very odd way for me, and I loved it. Uh, but yeah, one of the other ways that I actually deal with the writing in my books for this series is, so as I mentioned, the main character in the first book is Daith, and then the main character in the second book is Danny. So each book has its own main character, and the series is going to be 10 books long, and there are 10 key characters that we will hear their stories, and the general layout of a book is the first half to three quarters of it is the backstories. The character is catching up to the character in the point in the story where we left off in the previous book, um, and then continuing the story from that character's point of view. Uh, and then also chapter by chapter is in a book. The odd chapters are the main character, and then the even chapters are through the point of view of whatever character they were primarily interacting with in the previous chapter, or maybe even into the next chapter. So it causes this little bit of a ladder effect in the storytelling. But for me, what I really love about it is that they're fallible narrators. They narrate as they experienced, and so it's like I've got points where a character will be like, and I totally got away with lying, and then like in the next chapter, the character will be like, yeah, I just didn't care. It's like, and but like there's more dramatic ways that works too. Is I have a character in the second book, I have two characters introduced, and the first character is very much trying to help the second character. And it's like everything they do is there to kind of bring some joy to the character, and make them feel safe and help them out because they obviously need it. And then in this when it's in the next chapter and you're reading it from the other character's point of view, uh, they're an abuse victim. They're used to people around them trying to control them, and them just kind of running along, going along with it because they're afraid of the consequences. And so from her point of view, like, he's not being helpful, he's being manipulative. And and she's very untrusting of him because she sees the nice guy thing, and she's just kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop and how that's going to end up hurting her. And so because they're coming at this from two very different angles, they're the same thing is happening, but they're experiencing two very different things. And I feel like that this helps bring empathy to the reader. And so, like, I very much enjoy doing that, but I also find that it helps me write. I'll get to a point where I'm having an interaction with a couple characters, and then it's just trudging through molasses. And so I'll go to the next chapter and I'll do the part where they're sharing a scene. I'll hit it from the other angle.
You had the question come in. It was delayed from when you had played the audio clip.
Yeah.
They're asking if the voice training is another thing you have to practice for audio.
I personally don't do the audiobooks. I have a friend that does that, and I've always loved his voice. I used to be in a band with him, and I joined the band because I loved listening to him sing. But it's like I actually deal with on a couple of other projects, voice actors that are doing stuff, and most of them do. What they're doing is they practice reading aloud and recording it and listening to it, and some of it is stuff you fix in post, and some of it is just tricks that you learn. I was on a podcast for a little while, and there's things that there's definitely is practice, not hissing into the microphone, not your pops and all that stuff. But as far as like figuring out like your way you read, I've got different audio people that do it differently. I've got some people who say I just pick it up and read it, and I've got other people who say I read it 3 times and I ask questions of the person who wrote it, of what they're aiming for in this thing. And like Ron, the guy who does this book, he has been, we've been friends for a long time, and he actually knows a fair number of these characters, as I have talked over the years. And so, like, he's got a pretty good grasp on them. And but like, he reads out loud and does podcasts and is always just breaking down his audio. And like, he is an audiophile, like, to the max. Like, he is definitely what I would call an audio snob. So um, I know that he puts a lot more effort into it than some other people. And but I've worked with people from all ages who do it different ways.
Another question came in. As a writer, I often get embarrassed hearing my own words read out loud. Do you ever get past that embarrassment, or does that always stay?
So I embrace it. I feel you on that. In the like, I don't like reading my characters out loud, which so I get that. But hearing other people read them out loud, I enjoy, because just because, like, because they're still doing it. Like, if they were reading out loud and you're just like, oh, I can't. But like, there's this, it's like, I've gotten this affirmation, like, from my audio guys. He originally signed on to just do the first book and was like, yeah, I'll do this and see how it goes. And he was about 6 chapters in when he said, told me he wanted to read the follow-up books. And like, him and I are friends, but we're not nice to each other always when it comes to our creative works, because we understand that being nice doesn't help you get better. So like we both will tell each other if we don't like something that the other person does, and so like part of it is, like trusting that people who tell you that they want more, uh, you know, like trust them and give them more. And, so like that's kind of my take on it. Uh, but I am not sure I will ever fully get over like the not really liking reading my own stuff out loud. I love reading my own stuff, but just in my head where and across my face. Actually, I have a lot of people that hang out with me when I write are very entertained by the fact that when I'm reading or writing, you can kind of tell what's going on with the character, because, like, if a character looks surprised, I'll look surprised. If they look confused by something, I'll usually cock my head and raise my eye. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, what it comes down to is you do have to get it out there. Like, if you are writing a journal, that's one thing. But if you are writing stories that you are trying to get out of your head, um, just remember that if you like them, so does somebody else. That was my first thing that like I really had to hammer into my head when I started writing was, does anyone else care? I'm like, well, if I do, someone else does, because that's just the way of things. I'm not that special. Um, so yeah, it's kind of my stance on all of that. Uh, any other questions?
There's one more that's coming in. But they're
Okay.
not. Oh, they stopped typing.
Nope.
Did you want to talk about what inspired you to start the series to begin with?
Yeah. So what actually started the series originally is, way back uh, in the early 2000s. I was playing a lot of Vampire the Masquerade, and they were going through, yeah, or they had a thing called the New Bremen Chats, and it was an online role playing setup where it was done all in chat rooms. And so I played several characters, and a couple of them I definitely workshopped for these stories. But the two main characters, Danny and Dave, came around because I was playing Hunter the Reckoning, and I had a hunter whose name was Dave, and he was an innocent. Like he was definitely and a lot of the other hunters didn't like innocents, so they weren't really interacting with him, and he didn't know what he was, and neither did anyone else who was willing to talk to him. And he ended up getting kind of embraced by the group of mages, being like, I think that you're a mage, and tried to teach him how to do magic. And he was really bad at it because he wasn't a mage. But the storytellers didn't like the way that I was that I was playing the character, and they ultimately ended up banning the character. But at that point, he was in a bunch of people's storylines, and so like I ended up offline writing out a bunch of scenes with people to kind of end that storyline. And but then what I ended up doing is I ended up making a new character whose name was Danny, who physically looked exactly the same as Dave, and but was a mage, and had different personality things. But what he wanted to do is he wanted to just be accepted. And when I brought him in, everybody hated him. Like he was a reminder of this other person that was no longer around, and like kind of the heartbreak that went with that for that character. And like I loved it. I love when things go wrong for characters. It allows for growth and all this other fun stuff. But like dealing with how like just no one would accept him, and like and no matter how nice and how hard he tried. um and so like I really liked that dynamic. And so when I started writing the books, I wanted to introduce those two characters as the one who's got a lot of power, and people don't necessarily accept him, and the character who isn't necessarily powerful but everybody loves. And and like and the dynamic that you would get out of those characters, and in the books they are best friends, but they definitely live their lives very differently. So yeah, that's really, so I guess that long short of that, what inspired me to start writing these books was giving the middle finger to people who told me I couldn't play a character the way I wanted to play a character. And so sometimes spite inspires you. And I know that there are a great number of projects I've worked on in my life that have happened because someone told me I couldn't, or no, or whatever. So if you're someone who's driven by spite, embrace it. Don't be a dick about it. Just use it to be creative. So yeah, that's that. Uh, did that other question ever end up coming through?
No, we can just move on to the next one. Do you ever run into a problem where your characters aren't cooperating with you as a writer?
Oh, all the time. I think that this is the joy of writing first person from the mind of a character. Is if you're truly getting into that character and letting them be who they are. Um, a lot of people don't like being told what to do. And so I regularly get characters who do that. Like as I mentioned earlier, as I had as introducing the poly relationship, is the character I thought would be totally on board was just like, absolutely not. I care about, I care about my partner, and I do not want to harm them. And it took it took his partner, a lot of explaining, and a lot of just really delving into what was being felt and all of that stuff to convince. And even once the convincing happened, it wasn't just yay on board. It was definitely a big long process. But I also I get characters who I had a point where I thought one character was just going to flip their lid, and they did, until they had their support network around them, and and basically had the right people around to to bring them off the ledge, as you might say, and and calm them down, and basically tell them, show them that the world wasn't that bad. And so I had this. I actually changed the name of my second book because of this interaction, where I was just like, when I started writing the book, knowing, hey, when this part happens, this character is going to lose their damned mind. And you know, and the other characters were like, no, that's not going to happen. And it ended up, oh, I think it ended up tacking almost 100 pages onto what I was planning on writing, as as the other as the character's support network came in and did damage control, and really really worked against the trauma that I was trying to cause as a writer. And in the long run, I got to the point in the story I wanted to be. I took a very different route because the characters didn't agree with me, and they had a very they are at that point in the story also very much just not only different route, but handling it differently, and thus things have gone in different ways. And there's been some close brushes because of it, and there's definitely been some other chaos caused by it. But I love that. And and it's it was the second book that really taught me that, where I was raised with, a novel is about 300 pages. Write about 300 pages, get your story in, make it flow nicely. My second novel taught me that your novel is going to be as long or as short as it needs to be to tell the story. Um, and so tell what needs to be told. And if you feel like that, the route is a long route, um, make sure that you're not just talking for the sake of talking, but but like make sure that the characters get their say, make sure that people get to do what they're going to do. And the other way goes around. I've had parts where I'm like, oh, this is going to take a while to get around to, and then characters are just like, hey, you want to do this thing? And they're like, yeah, let's do it. Boom, chapter done. And I'm just like, okay, missed that. So like I fully expect that in my series I will have books that are as small as 200 pages, and in my second book, yeah, it's almost 450 pages. um, and so like I'm just gonna, it's like I'm gonna tell the stories that need to be told, and I'm gonna let the characters do what they need to do.
It sounds like your characters have a pretty bittersweet relationship with you.
Yeah, I with my characters, like I actually, I picked up some new software recently that allows me to map the character relations, which helps and set timelines, and just mark all the different interactions that they've had. And it's like I've always done this on like spreadsheets and whatnot, but now I've just got better software for it. But for me, it's important to have a consistency in how characters interact, and but also a reason. It's like I have like I have characters who don't get along because in their first interaction they just they rubbed each other the wrong way, and so like there's always going to be that little bit of static between them. But I've also got other characters who, like one character gets along great with the other character, and the other character doesn't. And it might be they don't because they remind them of the things that they've done wrong, or maybe they do, they're enamored with this character because they had an impact on them early on, and so it's like I try to follow those, and being able to map that stuff is really nice, because I can look at like, oh look, in these last half dozen interactions, like it's like they have slowly gotten more cordial, like they've grown together. Why have they grown together? And then yay, the joy of doing everything digital is I can go back into a chapter and and expand on a conversation that helps the change in dynamic with a character with characters make a little bit more sense. And as I said earlier, I try to interview all of my characters. I've got a list of like, I don't know, 20, 30 questions that I ask them, and so I can just kind of see how they'll react to things.
So, are there any of your secondary characters that you wish you focused a little more on?
Yes. So like as secondary characters go, like I'm like when I watch shows, or a lot of my TV stuff is like I oftentimes don't find myself the most enamored with the primary characters. It's the supporting cast that I love, and so like I've got a character who's become pretty prevalent in the second book. Her name is Elsie, and but in like the first book, I just kind of I mentioned her, but like I like and I'd given a description, and I really like I liked the way she looked. And she is a character with a lot of tattoos and whatnot. And I really wanted to delve into why, right? Why did she have all these tattoos? Why was she that, but also seemed very much a recluse? And so, like in that case, I delved into it with this main character of the second book, because he interacts with her a lot more, and I got to follow that path, and I got to see those. But like my guy who's reading my book right now, he was reading through, and he says he got to chapter 5, and there's this character. Her name is she just goes by Ma, right? Like she is this old Mexican lady, owns a Mexican restaurant, lives just outside of town, and she likes to hire the kids around town who who have it rougher. Like she wants to help them out, but she doesn't want. She's not trying to just give handouts. She wants people to earn what they're getting, and but like she takes a shining to Daith, the main character, in chapter 5, and the guy reading my audiobook was just like, so far, like like there are more like characters who I find more fun to read, but like he really loved her because he was like she's a minority, and she truly cares about her community, and there doesn't appear to be any ulterior motive. Like there's too often that that he says that he reads a character and they're good, and he's got to figure out what the ulterior motive is. And he says that this character truly feels like there is no ulterior motive. And so like uh I like and it's kind of she's kind of a passing character, and so I think that somewhere down the line I'll have to touch base with her again. And but yeah, I love the secondary characters. Also partly because I don't need to know them as well. Like I can focus on the things I really like and not be boxed in by all of the other things that I know about the character. So yeah.
I think you mentioned earlier that you were using alternating narratives
Yeah.
for the flashbacks and the present. What made you decide to do that?
I really is so like I like to know what's going on in a story. I like to know why people are doing things, and I think that was the original thing was as like I would do a scene, and then I would want to know like what the other person was actually thinking. Since I'm doing first person, like if you're doing an omnipotent narrative, and and they're telling the story in a third person perspective, like you can have them fill in all those blanks. And I found really that having the characters fill in those blanks was really nice. And sometimes two characters know each other well enough that that I don't need the overlap. Like I will tell the story up to a point and then kind of pick it up with the other character. Uh, but other times, like they don't know what each other are thinking, and so I'll go across the same scene twice, but like I do my best to make sure that it feels like a very different scene, like that it's even if it's not a very different scene, it's filling out that other information. And it tells a story in a linear but not fully linear fashion, so it bounces around a little bit. um, but and then just as a writer, like the one of the reasons that I love doing it is like I'd started going into is uh, I will get to a point where I don't know where to go with a conversation that's being had, and so I'll just switch to the next chapter and I will start that conversation over from the other person's perspective, and and be responding and seeing why I got responses, and sometimes I end up going back and changing dialogue because of that. But being able to like run both, I don't do really well with be with being in two minds at once. So I will like it's like I can do a story and kind of give responses as far as I think makes sense on one side, but then when I go through on that other side and like I am experiencing the conversation from this, sometimes this character will be like, "That's not what I said," and and other people will be, or other times they'll be like, I feel the need to explain why I said that, and so like yeah, well, I did it all, pretty much in every reason for me, as both a writer and the way I like to receive stories. And it also just it wasn't that the level of structure that I used for it wasn't something that I had seen before. Like there's lots of stories where the narrator changes throughout, but I wanted it to really stick with one character and it be their story, and have the secondary characters supplement said story.
Are there any particular scenes or interactions that you're particularly proud of without giving too much spoilers?
Yes. I've got a number of them like throughout, and like I've got a scene in the second book that is the main character, who's the life mage. is interacting with Elsie, the character that I said that I had, that was very curious to me. And she is a vampire, and she's pretty effing old, and she's been collecting these tattoos her whole life, and so there's a lot of them that are just faded almost beyond recognition, or like they've the ink's bled a little bit here and there. And as a life mage, he and her being his friend was like, hey, can I fix these for you? And um, she was not on board, because it turns out that these are memories for her, and she didn't want them altered. And so, the way that scene progressed over several chapters, really, and into earning that trust and getting to rework all that art, was something that I just really loved, because like there was there was an intimacy about it. I love art, right? And I know how important and how moving art can be for people. And I have a fair amount of tattoos, and I'm particular about how well I take care of them. And it's and I would also be hesitant to let anyone touch my tattoos who weren't people that I really trusted as artists. And so that was one of the scenes that I was really kind of proud of how it ended up growing, and how much it affected my book. And then I've been doing NaNoWriMo, and so I've been writing the third book right now. And I have a whole bunch of scenes that have one of the secondary characters is the mother of one of the most poised characters in the first two books. And you only just get to meet her in the third book, and she is the living embodiment of id. She is gender norms flipped on their head, and she is vulgar, and just absolutely inappropriate. And I like I love how much I can still I am writing that, and it's inappropriate, and it's not inappropriate for the character. And so the characters around her spend a lot of their time doing damage control, and getting to play around with that is, I don't know, less proud of, but something I'm having a lot of fun doing.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We have a couple minutes left. Is there anything you didn't get to mention that you wanted to, or any closing remarks?
Yeah, and I guess big one is, if the things that I'm doing sound interesting to you, uh, I've got a Patreon. It's you can search Waking of the Gods on Patreon, and if you follow me, I'm Will Carson on Facebook. It's at Guarman, Guarrrman. Um, I use my personal account for a lot of whatever creative projects I'm working on at the time. So I don't post a lot. I post the things that when I feel inspired. But feel free to follow me there. And if you ever have questions about just writing in general, I'll be doing a world building panel in a couple of hours. I think it's 3. And so I guess that's in an hour. But I'll be doing a world building panel on writing. I work on several projects, and one of the big things that's important to me is world building. So yeah, come check that out.
You got one more question that came in, is where do you find the fine line of how challenging a character is, i.e. fighting gender norms?
So for that, I've always done, I like watching commercials and then just either gender, race, whatever, and I like to switch them and see if the commercial still makes sense. Sometimes that's hilarious. In the case of a grandchild lifting up their child, or a grandparent lifting up their grandchild, and then I swap those, and it's funny in my head. But a lot of those are like with this character who is inappropriate. I was like, it is a very stereotypical, you know, character who like a very stereotypical male character who doesn't give a shit about anything, and to flip that on its head, but also not make that character physically a brute, right? Like, I mean, she is, but like she is a, you know, like 5'3", girl who is strong, but not, you know, just she's not ripped. Normally, she is also a vampire, and when she loses control, she kind of hulks out. But standard build, like, she's just this little girl who's super inappropriate, and you know, like, there's that, but there's also there's a lot of uh, making sure that what I'm doing tells the story, can be uncomfortable, but isn't mocking or being disrespectful to the thing I'm focusing on at the time. Be that religion, be that sexual orientation, be that be that race. It's taking care to be uncomfortable, but handling it well. So I think that about wraps me up.